Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mark Borshi. I'm the CTO of Terminal Security. And today we're going to be talking about integrating Argo Cd into OpenUnison through SSO. Now, in a previous video, we had talked about integrating Argo Cd and SSO and OpenUnison for SSO by building a trust object. And that's the easiest way for OpenUnison to support SSO to other systems. When you create that trust object, it goes ahead and piggybacks off of the same identity provider that we created for Kubernetes. And that's great if you either need to propagate that token down to Kubernetes. A lot of applications, dashboards, they want to use that token to interact with Kubernetes on your behalf. If all the claims, so in the identity world, the attributes that go into token are called claims. And if all the claims are the same, then you can piggyback off of that as well. But that's not always the case. So for instance, with Argo Cd, we've integrated with Active Directory for our identity provider or for authentication. And those groups come back as what's called an LDAP distinguished name, and it has a lot of commas in it. And Argo's RBAC definition doesn't like that. And so what we want to do is we want to say, okay, let's just get the names of the groups rather than the full distinguished names. And then also, we only want to send groups to Argo that are for Argo. A lot of enterprises, you'll get tons of groups that have absolutely nothing to do with the application that you're logging into. And there's no need to give those groups to the application. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a new identity provider on top of OpenUnison. That identity provider is first going to strip out all of the group names, or strip out all the distinguished names, so that way they're just group names, so Argo Cd's policy manager will be happier. And two, we're only going to send groups to Argo Cd that Argo Cd actually cares about. So all the other groups, Kubernetes-related groups that aren't related to Argo Cd, those will get stripped out of the token. So let's first show off what we're talking about here. So here's our Argo Cd. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log into OpenUnison. And we go over to our groups here and we see I'm a member of 4 groups. These are the only 2 groups that Argo Cd cares about, Argo Cd users and Argo Cd admins. So now in theory what we want to do is we want to make it so that if I log in and I'm a member of Argo Cd admins, I'm now an administrator in Argo Cd, and now I can control that centrally through Active Directory. And this will work too if you're using Okta or any other the centralized authentication systems out there, Azure AD, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 objects. Instead of building a trust, we're going to first create a mapping so that we can massage the data before it goes into the token. And then we're going to create a new identity provider. We'll look at both of those. So first, let's look at our mapping. So we have quite powerful mechanism in OpenUnison to be able to let you use JavaScript to customize almost every aspect of OpenUnison. You can build custom authentication schemes, custom workflow tasks, custom applications. Here, we're going to do a custom mapping. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our JavaScript mapping. So this is going to get stored inside of our API server. We're going to create an attribute. We're going to get the groups from the existing user. So that's going to be the list that looks like this. And then for each of these groups, we're going to get the group name. We're going to remove everything from the group name that is not the name itself. So we're going to get rid of everything that makes it a distinguished name. Now, one thing to be very careful here is if you do decide to go this route, make sure that you don't have the same name for groups in different parts of Active Directory, because that'll be a bit of a collision here. So you want to be careful about that. And then finally, we want to check, okay, does the group start with Argo Cd? And if it does, we're going to go ahead and send it. And lastly, we return the actual attribute that we created. Once we've created this mapping, let's go ahead. Am I logged in? I don't think so. No, I'm not logged in. So let's go ahead and log in to our cluster. Okay, get nodes. Okay, awesome. So once I create the mapping, the next piece I'm going to create is an application. So an application is just what it sounds like. It's how OpenUnison breaks itself up. So if you were to look in our OpenUnison namespace, you'll see that there are a bunch of applications already. That's because that's the way OpenUnison's built up. We start with a base image, and then we use these application configs to actually create the OpenUnison portal that you're using to log into your Kubernetes clusters. And so let's kind of walk through that here. We're going to define a new application. We're going to call it Argo Cd. It's an arbitrary name, doesn't really matter. We're going to give it an authorization timeout of 3,000 milliseconds. So what this means is every time we're going to define authorization rules here in a second, and OpenUnison will cache the decision of that rule for this session for 3 seconds. Usually want this to be about how long a full page will load or a complete transaction will happen if you're talking about an API. And it's meant to cut down, the decision was already made as we're loading up this page. We don't need to check that you're a member of some group every time an image loads up on the page. That'd be really slow. So this really gives you a performance boost. But you don't want to make it too long because you want to be able to recheck those permissions. Next up is your cookie configuration. So this is how OpenUnison tracks your session. For the most part, you can leave this alone. We've got this on pretty secure defaults, and so you'll want to leave it there. The one thing you might want to change is this timeout that's 15 minutes. Change it to whatever your policy says for idle timeout. This is one of the most important parts here where we say is app false. So there are 2 types of applications in OpenUnison. One is what we would call like a reverse proxy application. So if you ever worked with like OAuth2 proxy or Nginx, where the application sits behind OpenUnison. Great example of this is the Kubernetes dashboard is an application that sits behind our reverse proxy. In this instance, though, we're building an identity provider. So we're not going to use our reverse proxy, but we're going to stand up an identity provider that'll generate tokens for us. So every application is built into URLs. Identity providers are special. They have only one URL. And so we define that here. So we go ahead and first we define our authorization rules. So who has access to this? Now, right now, we are letting Argo Cd handle all of our authorization based on groups. But we might want to say, we're going to make sure you can't access Argo Cd from this system. And so OpenUnison would then become your authorization point. So you could do that here. We could say, okay, I'm only going to let people who are members of groups that start with Argo Cd into Argo Cd. You can do it based on an attribute or group. And documentation talks about what those choices are. And then we come in here. You're going to see this notation a lot throughout configuration. Not as much as you used to, but this is a way for us to be able to have variables. So this gets included from the OpenUnison object. For the most part, you can just leave that alone. And so we define our OpenID Connect identity provider. And then we have a mapping. So this is really where the magic is happening here. So this is where we define what attributes or claims are going to go into the ID token that gets sent over to Argo Cd. And so each attribute has a source type. It can be either a user, it can be static. So if you want just the same value every time to be sent over, sometimes like a tag or a label or something like that. You can have composite, where you simply combine multiple attributes in a specific way. Or you can have custom. And so this is where we define how our mapping gets used. We have source type of custom. It's going to create the groups attribute. And we're going to call this custom mapping, which is called the JavaScript mapping. And it's going to load a mapping from the K8s target. So everything in OpenUnison, we'll talk about this when you get over to the provisioning world of OpenUnison. is a provisioning target. There's one target that's built into every OpenUnison deployment. That's Kate's. That's how OpenUnison talks to your cluster. In the OpenUnison namespace, and it's called Argo Cd group. So that's the mapping that we defined earlier. And so that's going to take that groups attribute and put it into our ID token. Next, we get to the parameters. This is how we configure. OpenUnison to manage the identity provider, and this is something that, for the most part, you can keep the same. And then finally, our trust. So this is finally the important part here. So this is where we define how this identity provider, what applications can integrate with this identity provider. So instead of defining a separate trust object the way that we did previously, we're going to go ahead and embed that trust directly into this identity provider. The only identity provider that you can have dynamic trusts for is the Kubernetes identity provider. That's the main identity provider. And so this will look a lot like the trust object. We define a name for our trust, the different parameters, client ID. I would suggest putting, since you're going to have multiple identity providers now, go ahead and prepend some kind of label on the client ID so you can tell which goes where. And we're going to define it as a public endpoint. The reason why we're defining it as a public endpoint as opposed to a private endpoint is because the CLI for Argo Cd, you're not going to pass a client secret to everybody who wants to use that CLI. So you're not gaining a lot of security benefit there. If there was going to be a client secret defined, we would go ahead and define it in a secret. We wouldn't actually embed it directly in here. And then finally, results. So this is a result to an action. So the result, if the authentication fails, is redirect a user to the login error page. Same thing. The result, if the authorization fails, is redirect them to a login page. You can create cookies, you can create headers, etc. And then finally, the URI. This is the URI for our identity provider that we'll configure for Argo Cd in a second. So let's go ahead and create this object, or these objects. So control create git openunison.github.io docs assets YAML, and we're going to do Argo Cd IDP. Oops. Oh, that's why. So I had already created that mapping. So we're just doing apply. I forgot to clean it out before I recorded. Oops. Okay, so we now have our identity provider in place. The next step is to integrate Argo Cd. So let's come over here to Argo Cd. So here's Argo, and you can see here we've got our username, password, but we don't want to log in with that. We want to SSO in. We want to have a little button for SSO. So let's go ahead and configure that. So first thing we need to do is edit CM and Argo Cd. All right, so here is the Argo Cd config map. This is where most of the configuration options go. And we are going to go ahead and you'll notice that when you first implement Argo Cd, there is no data section in this config map. So we're going to go ahead and add that and copy and paste. Did not work real well. All right, so let's go through these options. First, the URL, we're going to tell Argo Cd where it lives. That's because it's behind multiple load balancers. So it doesn't always get the right URL. So the right way to handle that is you just tell it what URL to use. Next is the IDC configuration. So first we've got the name. So we're going to call it OpenUnison. That's what's going to show up on the login screen. The issuer, so this is our This is this points to our identity provider. Now this is pointing to the Kate's identity provider. That's not going to work real well for us because we defined this new identity provider over here. So let's go ahead and grab the identity provider we want to use, Argo Cd, and we're going to get the client that we defined. So here's our client, Argo Cd Web. That's it. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And if we come back here and give it a quick, refresh, we'll see that we can now log in via OpenUnison. Well, that was quick. So it logged it in for us. It automatically decided to log us in. So if we come over here to our user info, we'll see that we were logged in from our Argo Cd application, or our identity provider we defined. We're logged in as Matt Mosley. And here are our groups. And it's only our Argo Cd groups, and they've been stripped down so that's only the group names, not the full distinguished name. So SSO is working. Awesome. So the next question is, what can we do? Well, Argo Cd has its own group management. So like I come over here to projects, let's create a new project, call it test, and it's going to fail because I'm not authorized. We need to now authorize our group to be able to do something. So let's go ahead and come back here. And let's go ahead and edit our RBAC config map. And so just like with the configuration config map, this one doesn't come with a data section. So I'm going to go ahead and let's steal this. So Argo Cd defines its own policy language. So in addition to leveraging Kubernetes built-in RBAC, Argo Cd has its own RBAC that can be used for its objects. So if you're creating your objects through Kubernetes API calls, it uses RBAC. If you're creating it through the GUI, it has its own built-in management language, or RBAC language. So this is an example based on, okay, if you're a cluster admin, I guess you should be able to manage Argo. In our instance, we've got a different group for that. So let's go ahead and set this up correctly. So we want to make it so that anybody who is, oops, how am I not logged in again? That's weird. All right, let's log back in. All right, so we want Argo Cd admins. All right, so we have now defined a new policy called new policy where the group Argo Cd admins, oops, delete my role, will get the role of admin. So anybody who's a member of this group in their token will be an admin inside of Argo Cd. So we save that, and now we should be able to go over to projects. Valid memory address. Oh, isn't that fun? Wonder if that's just because we made a change and Argo Cd didn't like it. So let's log back in. All right, so we're logged back in. Go to projects. All right, let's see what I broke. Here's the policy, Argo Cd-admins. Group, Argo Cd admins, role, admin, policy. Oh, I see what I did. Copy and paste. Gets me every time. These are supposed to be two different keys. All right, now let's give it a go. There we go. So now I can actually see it. So I didn't even see this project before, this new project before when I wasn't an admin, and I want to create a project. I can. Oh, maybe, maybe not. There we go. Okay, so now I'm able to create a project. Sometimes, eventual consistency, it takes a second for everything to catch up. So we have gone ahead and set up our integration with Argo with custom groups. And so the last thing we're going to want to do is get this badge on here. So that way, when our developers log in, they can access Argo Cd directly. So let's go ahead and go to the Argo Cd. Now let's just search OpenUnison. There we go. So there is a link here for, here we go, portal URL. So I'm going to copy that link, and let's see here. Can I do open a new tab? No, it just wants to download it. I don't want to download it. So what is fun about this kube control create F? So I'll go ahead and do a kube control get portal URL Argo Cd and OpenUnison. All right, so that's 12 seconds old. And just to show why I wasn't going to download it, all this stuff is, actually, this will be much easier if I edit it. That's better. Okay, so when we define our portal URL, that's what goes on the front page here. And in fact, if I hit the refresh button, you'll see that there's now a portal URL for Argo Cd. We can have an authorization rule. So this authorization rule should line up with your application. If you're only going to let people who have access to Argo Cd access it, then you would want that here as well. So that way people who log in that don't have access to it aren't going to see the portal URL. Then the icon is just a base 64 encoded PNG file, 210 wide, 240 high. It's in the docs. Don't worry, don't have to memorize it. What the label is, what the org is. We're not going to really get into orgs right now, but you can actually, as you build out the number of links, this especially becomes true when you're dealing with multi-cluster, you can organize your links into a tree-like structure. And then finally, the URL. Where's it going to go? And in fact, this is wrong, so we got to fix this. We got to go to the right one. So let's save that. And let's just log out. Refresh this so we get the right URL. And there we go. I'm logged in. I'm an Argo Cd admin. And I go over to projects, and there are my projects, and I create a new one if I want to. So what we have done here is we have, as a quick recap, is we created a mapping that cleared out the distinguished name aspect of groups, and also stripped out any groups that weren't for Argo Cd. We set up a new identity provider inside of OpenUnison with a single YAML file. That included the trust with Argo Cd, all the different configurations that were needed. You want to integrate other applications, just customize that file. You don't have to create one from scratch. And then finally, we went ahead and configured Argo Cd to work with OpenUnison and to have RBAC set up so that way it was working off of our groups. So thanks very much. Give us a follow, hit that subscribe and subscribe link if you'd like. It really does make a difference. Like us if you like. And if there are other videos you'd like to see, let us know. Thanks and have a great day.